So once we have the p-value, the idea is we have to make a decision on what to say about the null hypothesis, and then an interpretation of what that decision means. So the first thing here, let me split this in half. So I'm going to always refer to it as the decision and then the interpretation. All right. So the decision, what you want to do is you're going to take that p-value that you found and you're going to look at your level of significance and you compare it with alpha. Okay? You compare those numbers. And then here's what you're going to do. If p is less than or equal to alpha, you reject H0, the null hypothesis. If p is greater than alpha, then you fail to reject H0, the null hypothesis. Remember, those are the only two decisions you can make. Reject H0 or fail to reject H0. What you're really doing here is saying that if p is less than or equal to, but let's just say less than alpha, then what you've really said is this is a very unlikely occurrence given the sample you found related to the population. So this sample, what you're finding from this sample, doesn't really mesh with the null hypothesis assumption about the population. So you reject it because it's not really following it. If p is greater than alpha, then that means that basically there's nothing about the sample that contradicts what the null hypothesis assumption about the population would say. It seems to follow along, so there's no reason to reject the null hypothesis. Okay, that's the decision, and then you have to interpret it. So basically, there's different interpretations based on the four different combinations here. So here's how I like to think about it. Start with whatever the claim was. All right. Remember, when you identify the claim, you know this in the beginning. The claim is either the null hypothesis or the alternative hypothesis. You know that from the beginning before you've made any decision. So if the claim is the null hypothesis, then I like to think what you're in here is a rejection mode. Meaning that related to the claim, so what we're trying to do here is make a statement about the claim now. The only thing I can do in this situation is either reject the claim or not have enough evidence to reject the claim. I either have enough evidence to reject the claim or I don't. If the claim is the alternative hypothesis, then I'm in a support mode. In this case, I can either do two things based on the claim. I either have enough evidence to support the claim or I don't have enough evidence to support the claim. All right? So what you're saying about the claim is either going to be a rejection idea or a support idea. And that's already determined by how the claim, where the claim is. If the claim is the null hypothesis or whether the claim is the alternative hypothesis. Okay? Then it's about the decision we made. So if your claim is the null hypothesis and you reject it, you end up rejecting the null hypothesis, what you've concluded is that there is enough evidence to reject the claim. All right, so you're right here. If your claim was a null hypothesis and your decision was to fail to reject the null hypothesis, then you're saying there's not enough evidence to reject it. This doesn't say that you know it's true. You're just saying that you failed to reject it. You did not have enough evidence to reject it. Okay. On the other hand, if your claim is the alternative hypothesis, if you reject the null hypothesis, you're essentially bringing yourself to the alternative. So you're saying there is enough evidence to support the claim. What you found says there is enough evidence to reject H0 and bring yourself to the alternative, therefore supporting the claim, which is the alternative. And yet, if your claim is the alternative and you fail to reject the null hypothesis, you're saying there is not enough evidence to support the claim. There's not enough evidence to fail to reject the null hypothesis, and you can't get to the alternative, hence there's not enough evidence to support the claim. So let's see some examples of this. All right, first one we'll just read through. How should you interpret the decision if you reject H0 or if you fail to reject H0? Okay, so let's go back to that one they were doing before. A school publicizes that the proportion of its students who are involved in at least one extracurricular activity is 61%. So we had set up the hypothesis test here. We identified the claim as the null hypothesis. Okay, so as soon as I've done that, I know that I'm in a rejection mode. When the claim is the null hypothesis, I'm in a rejection mode. Depending on what I find, there's only two interpretations that I can make. Either there is enough evidence to reject the claim, or there is not enough evidence to reject the claim. So now it depends on what I did about rejecting the null hypothesis or failing to reject it. If we found out we rejected the null hypothesis, it was the claim. I'm in a rejection mode. So there is enough evidence to reject the claim. If the decision was to fail to reject the null hypothesis, I'm in a rejection mode. I failed to reject the null hypothesis, which was the claim, so I do not have enough evidence to reject the claim. Let's look at another one. So here was the car dealership one. So this was the hypothesis test that we set up where the claim was the alternative hypothesis, mu less than 15 minutes. So as soon as I have the claim in the alternative, I know I'm in a support mode. There's only two interpretations I can make. I either have enough evidence to support the claim, or I don't have enough evidence to support the claim. All right, so that would be based on the decision. So let's say if we reject, I spelled that wrong, reject the null hypothesis. So if we reject the null hypothesis when we're in a support mode and the claim is the alternative, that means I've rejected the null hypothesis, bringing me to the alternative, hence supporting the alternative, which is the claim. So there is enough evidence to support the claim that mu is less than 15 minutes, that the mean waiting time is less than 15 minutes. On the other hand, if the decision was fail to reject the null hypothesis, if that was the decision and I'm in a support mode here, then that means I did not have enough evidence to get me from H0 to HA. And HA was my claim. So there is not enough evidence to support the claim that mu is less than 15 minutes. So that's the difference. So it starts with what the claim was. If the claim was the null hypothesis, then you're in rejection mode. In that case, you either have enough evidence to reject the claim or you don't have enough evidence to reject the claim. If the claim is in the alternative hypothesis and you're in support mode, then you either have enough evidence to support the claim or you don't have enough evidence to support the claim. Those are the 4 different interpretations.